brought to you by WP Relax. No matter whether you have an existing site, want to transfer your site, or need to start a WordPress site from scratch, we have a plan to suit your needs. So say bye-bye to WordPress problems and relax with WP Relax.
Hi everyone, this is Ahmed Al-Karimli and welcome to Be Efficient TV. The mission of this web TV show is to boost the efficiency of your business and life through tips and tricks from leading experts. And today I have with me Todd Tressider. He is the founder of financialmentor.com. He's an expert in money, investing, early retirement, and wealth building. Welcome to the show, Todd.
Thanks, Ahmed. Glad to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you on the show. So why did you quit your job as an investment hedge fund manager to move to be a financial advisor?
Well, first of all, I'm not a financial advisor. I'm a financial coach. And there's distinctions about that we can go into if you want. I left because I didn't want my tombstone to read I was great at making my rich clients a little bit richer, adding a few percentage points to the bottom line of my wealthy clients. It just wasn't my motivating goal in life. The whole reason I got in the hedge fund business was I wanted to learn how to invest. I wanted to understand how investing is done right. Once I'd achieved that outcome, it no longer was a path of growth for me. And so I moved on to what is the path of growth for me, which is helping ordinary people achieve extraordinary financial results.
So usually you invest only in the stock market. What is the hedge fund to explain it to some people? What is it about?
Well, hedge funds have been through evolution. Like when I was in the business, they were just called private placement partnerships. We didn't have a sexy term for them called hedge funds. And then these private placement partnerships used active investment strategies, a variety of active investment strategies. And over time, that got permutated. So hedge actually comes from the idea of hedging out market risk. So people were using, long, short, equity, market neutral, and various other strategies to hedge out market risk and to hedge various risks. And so that's where the term hedge fund came in. Over time, all the styles, more and more styles developed, including global macro, which has nothing to do with hedge. It's just taking outright bets on various situations in the world. And so it's really changed to just become a non-traditional asset class, if you will. They develop, in the hedge fund world, you can develop different risk profiles with paper assets. Whereas in the traditional way of investing in paper assets, you develop a straight market risk profile.
So it's just focused on paper assets and commodities as well in the market? Or just paper
not commodities. Commodities could be one division. You could be a hedge fund that includes commodities as your asset mix, or you might rotate through various asset mixes such as stocks and bonds and commodities depending on where you are in the economic cycle. Each asset class offers different opportunities at different points in the economic cycle. So depends on what the hedge fund's doing. There's specific styles. So there could be long, short, equity, market neutral. There could be global macro. There could be arbitrage. There could be a lot of different types of strategies that these guys implement depending on whatever they consider their investment edge to be.
Did you like this area of the paper assets? Do you still invest in it, or you feel that, because I feel always that regardless how much you learn, it's very difficult to predict where the market is going or to have control over the market, not like when you have a business or you have, let's say you invest in real estate. So what's your opinion about that?
Well, paper assets is a totally different world. It's building wealth in paper assets is completely different from the other two asset classes you mentioned. So there's three asset classes for building wealth. There's real estate, owning your own business, and paper assets. And what I like to say about paper assets with clients is it's kind of like the Alice in Wonderland world, where you go down the rabbit hole and it gets curiouser and curiouser and curiouser. It doesn't work at all like running your own business or investing in real estate, which are very intuitive. Your business common sense and intuition will do very well for developing a business and running a real estate portfolio. They will cost you a fortune in paper assets. Paper assets, the only people I knew who make consistent money use quantitative driven models. They understand how the game is put together and they play it completely different from how traditionally it's taught.
So they try to put options or to manage the risk more than, or how?
No, definitely not options trading. What I teach is I teach the principle of mathematical expectancy, which governs your compound returns. And so you have to understand what drives positive mathematical expectancy and how to manage your portfolio to create positive mathematical expectancy, which ultimately drives your compound returns. So it involves principles of risk management, understanding what methodologies even have a positive expectancy. Remarkably few do. And so it's
So
very different from what's
with
traditionally
your
taught.
clients, you focus on teaching them to invest in paper assets or the other categories as well?
It depends on the client. Again, I'm a financial coach. I work with clients to build wealth. And so it depends on the client, their needs, and what their advantage is. So I'll give the example. If a school teacher comes to me and wants to build wealth and they've got great handyman skills, but obviously as a school teacher, they're not making a fortune, but they have a couple months off each summer and they've got holiday breaks and whatnot, that client might be a really great candidate for home fixer-uppers, where they try to pick up a home every 1 or 2 years and fix it up and turn it into a long-term rental unit for positive cash flow. That might be a great strategy for that person. Another client comes to me, and this guy is a successful entrepreneur. He's running 2 separate businesses. He's paying rent on both. He's got staff. I work with him around acquiring the building that his businesses are housed in, rather than wasting money on commercial rent. Maximizing his paper assets, because he's already busy building wealth through his business, and he's going to have a cash out day on both of those businesses. And so what he needs to do is just harvest the income he's creating through the businesses and manage it and translate it into the asset category. So his needs are completely different from, say, a school teacher who isn't developing large assets and has to employ more leverage and bring in other principles to build wealth. So it really depends on the client and what their skills are, their resources, and what will actually work for them to build wealth. And it's different for each person.
And if they don't have any experience in investing, usually you advise them to go where to invest in which category?
Well, I don't think there is a usual which if there's no experience in investing. Clients need to. There is no usual answer like that. There's 3 asset classes you can work with. Each requires different skills, different abilities, different resources, and think of them as tools in a toolbox. You pull out different tools depending on what you're working on. And so there is no usual answer, just as there's not a usual tool you go to when building a house, right? If you need to cut wood, you grab a saw. If you need to hammer the wood, you grab a hammer. If you need to plane it, you grab a planer. I mean, each one has its function and each one has its attributes that work for a given situation. So there is no usual answer.
You have kind of a unique mission as a financial mentor. What's your mission or philosophy that makes you different than other mentors?
Well, the whole reason I got into this was I approached this game very differently from most people, as you can already tell just from our conversation. I spent a lot of time learning what works, what doesn't, and why. And I noticed that nobody has really assembled this into a cohesive body of work. It's like the old Indian folk tale, the 3 blind men and the elephant. Are you familiar with that one?
No.
Okay. All right. So it's an Indian folk tale. And so, you've got 3 blind men and they're told to go up to the elephant and describe the elephant. So the first one walks up and wraps his arms around the legs, and I'll spare you the goofy Indian imitation, right? And so he walks up to the elephant's leg and he says, "Oh, the elephant's like a tree trunk." And then the next guy walks up and he grabs the elephant's tail and he says, "The elephant is like a giant rope." And the third one grabs the elephant by the ear and says, "An elephant is like a giant fan." Each blind man is describing his experience of the elephant accurately, but he's missing the entirety of the elephant. He's not wrong. He's just contextually, he's dealing with a half-truth. And so that's how wealth building works, and that's how most of what passes for investment advice works, is most people have not put the work into understanding how the whole elephant is put together. There's a lot of dimensions. So you've got some people out there running around calling The Secret. I don't know if you remember when that film was all big, and it's all about prosperity consciousness and
law of attraction.
Yeah, and guess what? It's good stuff, but it has its limits, right? And then somebody else will come along and they'll talk about the millionaire mind and the millionaire mindset. And guess what? It's good stuff. But he's a blind man, right? And you can go on and on and on with all these things. Another guy will talk about stock options, blind man. Another guy will talk about, it's all in real estate, another blind man, right? He's describing his aspect of the entirety of the elephant. When in fact, what really works is when you understand the elephant and you put the various moving pieces together to construct the entire elephant. Then you have the elephant called wealth. So that's why I got in the business. Is I spent a lot of years putting it together. My perspective is different from what I hear out there, and so I'm just crazy enough that I think I can help people, and so I'm trying to put something together that helps people.
So at 23 years old, you are in debt, and then 35 years old, you are financially free. How did you do that, and what financial freedom really means?
Well, one question at a time. First of all, how did I do it is very simple. I had a very high income as a hedge fund manager, and I saved 70-80% of it. I mean, I saved most of it and invested it in the methodologies I developed as a hedge fund manager. And so my path to wealth is no different than so many others out there. The difference was that, it didn't really require frugalism because I had a very healthy income. And then on top of that, as you correctly pointed out, it was starting from age 23. And so I came out of college, and I just never raised my lifestyle. I mean, I just kept my lifestyle at what it was when I was a college kid. And I never suffered. I was making good money. I lived well, and but I saved most of it. And before I knew it, I was financially independent.
Second question. What's the meaning of financial freedom?
Well, okay, so that's, there's a lot of different ways you can go about what's the meaning of financial freedom. In a technical sense, if you want me to defining it is simply passive income exceeds expenses. So that's the definition of financial freedom. What's the meaning of it? That's a whole nother question, right? Like, what does it mean to your life? What does it mean? What does it do to you? How does it change what's important? How do your values that you push down surface up? There's a lot that goes into the question of what's the meaning of it. But if you want to know the definition is simply passive income exceeds expenses.
In one of the interviews I listened to you that you were saying that you retired and then you went for vacation, long vacations, and then you discover that the vacation is kind of a job when you keep doing it in the same way. Tell us what did you discover about yourself and about the process and that, about the fulfillment and these areas besides money.
So when I sold the hedge fund business and I was, quote unquote retired, air quotes, right? Let's put air quotes around it. I put on a backpack. I'd always wanted to backpack through Europe and the Middle East. So I put on a backpack and traveled for between 5 and 6 months, like 5.5 months. And what I noticed was the first month and a half was just like I'd always imagined it would be. It was just nirvana. I mean, it was just, so fantastic to just be on a permanent adventure and living out of a backpack and carefree and, just loving life. And so it was my new wife and we're cruising around. This is our honeymoon, right? We had just got married and we're cruising. Everything's just fantastic. And after about a month and a half, then I started noticing that patterns were developing. Right? Like, this is before the euro. And so each time you come to a new country, you'd have to get your currency. And then you go to a city to tour it. And of course, the church is the highest point in the city. So, you climb the church tower and the history of each country is built around war and politics. And so you go to the museums and it's all about the war and politics and history of any, and it just goes on and on and on. It's like the same thing over and over again. You feel like as you go from country to country, it's like Groundhog Day, only slightly different culture. And it was cool and I loved doing it. But after a while, it was like, okay, so now we're at this point in the day, we choose the restaurant for lunch. You choose this, you choose that. And I don't want to sound ungrateful. I loved it. It was a fantastic experience. But it also taught me that, the whole idea that financial freedom is an endless vacation is a myth. Because when life becomes an endless vacation, then vacation ceases to be satisfying. Vacation is fulfilling and enjoyable when it's in the context of meaningful work. Because then it's a break from meaningful work. When it becomes your life, then that becomes your task, is to entertain yourself. And that's a very narrow focus. That's a very self-indulgent focus of like, gee, what is my source of entertainment today? There's no depth to it at all. There's no meaning.
So what's the balanced vacation for you now? Like like 1 month a year or 2 months a year after researching that and testing and what did you discover?
It varies year to year, usually 3 to 4 months a year. And it's built pretty much around my kids' schedule. So, I take a lot of time off in the summer. Pretty much I just kind of get the business to scrape by in the summer and just survive. And then work a lot during the 9 months of the school year. We just came off of the kids being out of school for holiday break here in the US. And so I was off for that. So, the year before I took 4 months off because I spent a month, I was out in the desert for a long camping trip in the desert, and then turned around and put on a backpack and hiked the 250 miles of the John Muir Trail. I hiked with a backpack from the bottom of Yosemite Valley to the peak of Mount Whitney, which is the highest peak in North America, I believe. So that's called the John Muir Trail. It's a famous trail here in the Sierra Nevada. And so, it varies with the year and what my goals are and what I'm trying to accomplish.
The business is not like all depends on your blog and the website that you can do even if you're traveling, or you like to focus when you are back home and to work with the clients?
Yeah, people that know me, like my clients, I mean, they're like, yeah, please go take your trip. They love it because now I'm living the life that I'm coaching them toward, right? It's walking the talk. So my clients love it if I take a month off. And as far as the blog goes and all that, you can either program the posts in, or as followers of my blog knows, I'm rather erratic. I post when I got something to say, and if I don't have something to say, I don't post. I'm building out a body of content, and so if I miss a month, I miss a month. It's no big deal.
That's why you don't use dates on the blog post, which is very smart, that you don't feel in rush under pressure that you have to keep posting, right?
Yeah, I think that's a myth in blogging. If you look at the people that feel like they have to post, 3 times a week and that kind of thing, frankly, I think that burns out your list. And I don't think that I have anything meaningful to say 3 times a week. I don't think that, if I had to sit down and write a post 3 times a week, almost every site that posts that regularly burns me out and I unsubscribe. And so I just pay attention to my own behavior. I want somebody that when they send me something, it's really good. Because if you're interrupting my life with something in my inbox, it better be good. My 2 cents worth.
How it works with your client? Like, is there a membership fee, or is a monthly special program, or you charge per hour, or how it works?
Well, the business is in transition. When I originally started it, it was just going to be a cute little boutique coaching practice. And I was really curious, could I actually help people? And so I fumbled with it for years. And then in recent years, it took off. If you're on the site right now, you'd see that it's actually closed. I'm not even accepting new clients now. It got completely out of hand and it overran my life, and it was completely opposite what I'd intended. And so the business has now grown to a point where I can no longer really work with one-on-one coaching clients. It's just too much. And so what I'm doing now is I'm transitioning the entire business over to the group coaching model and the membership site model, so I can reach more people. As it turns out, because I've been doing this now for 15 years, I've pretty much broken it down to a systematic process. And so I'm converting that systematic process, productizing it, and putting into the 7 Steps to 7 Figures course. And that's where the whole business is going now. So that's where I'm taking everything. So the 7 Steps to 7 Figures is the whole elephant, as I was using from the earlier discussion. That contains the entire body of knowledge, and now I have to create that into the membership site model.
Can you brief us about the 7 steps?
Yeah, I mean, you want me to go through each step one by one?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So step 1 is just basic financial planning. So it's the stuff you'd get if you went to a normal financial planner. It's just getting your house in order, so to speak. So that's kind of like a foundational piece. So steps 1 and 2 are both foundation. So it starts with just the basic financial planning, just getting you got to get to a point that you're saving money, not going in debt, and you've got proper insurance. You've got your I's dotted and T's crossed. So that's step 1. Step 2 is what I call habitudes of the wealthy. And what I've noticed is that people who build wealth versus people who build debt, go deeper into debt, they have mere opposite habits. So it's not just the wealth or the debt is actually a mere reflection of the habits and attitudes that the person has adopted. And I fell into that by accident. What happened was I used to accept debt clients, get out of debt clients. I don't anymore, but I used to. And I can remember there was a day where I had this like completely opposite experience of clients. I'd have these wealth clients and I'd have debt clients, and they'd be juxtaposed during the day. And it just struck me how completely opposite they were. Not just their financial situation, which was, a clear opposite, but their
How they
beingness.
think, yeah.
Yeah, how they think, what their attitudes are, how they operate in their life, how they run their life. And what I realized was that the money was just a reflection. It was a mirror image. It was not the cause. The cause was the habitudes. And so that's step two. It teaches structured habitudes, and it goes through and it layers those habitudes one week after another. So you're building habitudes that result in wealth over time. If you just got that step alone correct, eventually you would get wealth, because eventually you would mirror everything else that follows it. And so step three is a wealth plan. And the wealth plan is totally different from what you get from a financial advisor. It's how I develop wealth plans. And it's not just, if you buy these assets and it compounds over this time according to these assumptions like you get from a financial planner. It goes into the three asset categories, which you and I already discussed, which is business, real estate, and paper assets. And it breaks it all down, and then it converts it all into a timeline. And what people say is when they're done with step three, for the first time, they actually believe wealth is realistically possible for them, because it's so structured and laid out and engineered. Literally, the word is engineered. The whole thing is engineered to a point that they realize that if they do X, they'll get Y. And so that's step three. Now, what happens is step 4 and 5 follow on step 3, because once you get your wealth plan, you start implementing it, then all the crap happens, right? All the stuff gets in the way of life. And so step 4 is about taking massive action. How to take massive action. So it goes through the process of commitment, and there's two components. It's the process of commitment and committing to those goals. And then the second one is how to overcome your personal junk, your personal issues that are keeping you from achieving the goals. And all that comes up once you get into implementation. So you can't put step 4 before 3. You have to go through 3, begin implementation on a structured plan, and then 4 comes up. And then 5 is all about creating structured environments that literally pull you towards your goal. So it's about how to structure your life so it literally pulls you towards your goal. Step 6 is expectancy investing. It's how to compound your wealth properly using paper assets. And then step 7 is kind of the catch-22. It's wealthy, so what? Because basically nobody ever really wants more money. What they want is what they believe money will buy them. And so most people want whatever they perceive money will get them in their lives. And so step 7 is all about personal freedom, true wealth, living wealth.
But saving, is it all about living below your means, or there is another way to look at it?
Well, there's 2 dimensions, right? So you've either got make more or spend less, because savings is the gap between what you make and what you spend. And so you can go either way. So a frugalist will answer the question by saying, oh, you need to spend less, right? That's a frugalist answer. And that's the blind man and the elephant again, right? And then somebody else who teaches that entrepreneurism is the path to wealth, or real estate is the path to wealth, will say you need to raise your income level. Neither one's wrong, right? They're both dealing with half-truths. And so you can go either way, and smart people go both ways. Right? They put them both to work. So they try to raise their income and they try to lower their expenses at the same time, and they try to maximize the gap. That's what I did when I built my wealth. That's how I saved 70% plus of what I was making. Was I never raised my spending despite an enormous income to where I could clearly afford more than I was spending. I just didn't have the values for it. I didn't need a Corvette or anything flashy. I like my truck. It's just the way I am. And so that's it.
And now when you have extra money, usually you invest in what personally? You invest in assets, you like paper assets, or you like real estate? What do you like?
Most of my extra money flows into paper assets. The business finally pays the bills now. So first time in a long time, the business pays the bills. Again, I did this for years and it never paid anything. but it's grown to a point now, so it does pay the bills, and so excess income is flowing into paper assets. And my intention, depending on what goes on in the real estate market around here, is I would like to own one large property. So I got out of the property business 2006 before the big decline. And if there presents a deal that I simply can't pass up, I may get dragged back in kicking and screaming. But I'm not desperately in need of it. So right now everything goes in paper assets.
Capital gain versus cash flow. Which one you like more, and why?
Well, ultimately, financial freedom is about cash flow. But if you just spend, like, let's say you just take this to an extreme and you invest all in bonds or fixed income, eventually, because I retired so young, if I don't get capital gains, eventually inflation destroys the value of the money. And so it's not an either or, you have to have both.
Is there a percentage to look at them? Like if I am buying a property, how much I should prioritize the cash flow over, let's say, capital gain?
Well, in the example of property, you want to prioritize cash flow because capital gain happens naturally because property will track inflation. It's not perfect, but over meaningful periods of time, it tends to track inflation. That's the source of the growth of value of property, is the fact that our government is, at least, I know you're in Dubai, but the government here in the US is hell-bent on creating inflation since they're the greatest debtor of the world. And so real estate is a beneficiary of inflation. Essentially, real estate is a leverage play on inflation. That's why real estate does well most of the time, because most of the time the government succeeds in creating inflation, and then every now and then you get deflationary periods, and because it's leveraged, it basically wipes equity out. And so real estate's a leverage play on inflation. But to answer your question, when buying real estate, you want to focus on the cash flow because the capital gain net of inflation takes care of itself inherently, as long as you buy the asset right and reasonable growth areas and so on and so forth.
How big is the inflation effect on the money that we save in the bank?
Well, that depends on what the inflation rate is, and that depends on what your personal inflation rate is, right? Inflation is not like it's taught. Like most things that we're going to discuss here, most stuff doesn't really work the way it's taught. So you actually have a personal inflation rate. So like my inflation rate probably reasonably matches government stats in that, I'm still dealing with, home and acquiring stuff, raising kids, all that. But, it takes somebody who's retired, their personal inflation rate can be completely managed to be completely different from government stats. You might have your home paid for, you own all your furniture, you own 2 cars, and you are running your food through a garden in the backyard.
No, but if I have money in the bank and they are paying me, let's say 3%, and the inflation is 5%, like what do you advise the people to do? And they don't know how to invest.
Well, that's a problem. I mean, if inflation exceeds your rate of return, you can't just put money. Basically, this goes into a question of what's risk, okay? Because most people sit here and define risk as volatility of returns, and so that would say that stocks are a risky asset class and cash or money market funds is not risky. But in fact, if you redefine risk as loss of purchasing power, which is how I define it, right? I define risk as loss of purchasing power because that takes into both capital loss as well as inflation risk. Then money markets or cash, as you were describing in this example, is probably your riskiest investment. And now stocks become less risky. So you have to understand this stuff at a deeper level. You can't just take superficial understandings. You can't just, So when you say somebody doesn't know how to invest, well, they need to learn how to invest. One of the things I teach is that there's a curve to building your wealth, life cycle to building your wealth. And in the early period of the wealth building life cycle, it's most important your savings rate in relation to your spending. And then in the later stages of your wealth life cycle, it's most important your investment return net of inflation. And so you've got to understand where you are in the life cycle of wealth, and you have to be prepared for it when you hit there. So if you turn to me and say somebody doesn't know how to invest and they're in the later stage of life cycle and they've got the money to be financially independent, then they've got a problem and they need to really focus on their financial intelligence and developing their investment skill.
Is mutual funds is a good or bad idea?
There's no asset class that's a good or a bad idea. You have to understand that each asset class has its own attributes. And so you need to take the good attributes and use them wisely and minimize the problem attributes. So taking mutual funds as an asset class to address your question, they're a great way to get a diversified portfolio with a small amount of money. You know, if you have $10,000, you can get a diversified portfolio through a mutual fund. You can also spend too much on expenses if you buy one that is a high expense ratio, and it may not have value added for that expense structure. So maybe you buy low cost passive index mutual funds, in which case you're getting the diversification at a fair value, and that's a smart use of that asset.
No, but the question is like when we look at the three different, let's say, different vehicles of investments, in case that I am learning to be an investor in one of these vehicles, which is real estate or commodities or paper assets or the business, and then I can't control it. But the question about mutual funds is about that you invest in some companies that they're gonna invest for you, and they you carry all the risk, and they just share with you the profit in case there is a profit. And usually those companies sell this portfolios to people through sales people who don't understand investments. So that's the point of the question, that we should learn ourselves to invest in the paper assets market or in the stock market, or we should give it to these companies to invest it on our behalf.
No, okay, so let me try to explain this. I see where you're going now. It's not whether mutual funds are a good investment. It's whether taking a passive portfolio a wealth building.
Or learning it myself.
Strategy.
Like, should I give the investments to somebody to invest on my behalf, or the investment I should learn it as a road myself, as a path myself? Because nobody will care as you care, and you should learn investment. You should learn what is the difference between, say, liability and asset, and where to invest, and what are the different vehicles for investments, and instead of just handing it over to somebody.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. Yeah, you can delegate the responsibility for your money, but you can never. You can delegate the authority over your money, but you can never delegate the responsibility for your money. And so if you believe that you're just going to hand your money to a financial advisor and they're going to build your wealth, I'm not a fan of that. You might get lucky. You might find somebody who's genuinely really good, that does have that capability, but it's rare. It's very rare, and so you would be fighting the odds to take that approach. Underlying your question, there's even more to it than where you're hitting. Where you're going is, can you do this passively, and can you just hand your money over to somebody, and is that the right strategy? There's a whole nother thing, which is a passive portfolio can be a brilliant wealth building strategy based on valuation. You need to understand how valuation affects expected returns over a 10 to 15 year time horizon. So like right now in the United States, it's one of the most overvalued markets in the world. And so as we record this, it's running at about 26K, which is cyclically adjusted price earnings ratio. So the expected return on that portfolio, on a passive portfolio in the US over time, 10, 15 year returns is low single digits with very high volatility. It's not impressive at all. And so that, again, that's just based on historical understanding, and it's also business common sense as to what it means to have a high valuation. And whereas if we turn that around, if it was a low valuation right now, a passive portfolio could be a brilliant strategy, as it was back in 1980. Back in 1980 when valuations were cheap in the U.S. And we were at the foot of a great bull market. It was a brilliant wealth building strategy. People built extraordinary wealth in passive portfolios. So you can't just take an idea like that and, just say it's either this or it's that. As a true economist, I'd say, well, it depends, right? You have to understand more. You have to take your understanding to what I call a second level of understanding.
Now, when you teach your clients, you teach them to learn about the stock market or to invest in certain companies or to invest in certain companies or like let other companies to invest for them, but they should follow certain formula to track like when to get in or when to get out or how to manage, let's say, their emotional, you know, control or intelligence. What's your strategy? How you teach them to invest in the paper assets market?
On paper assets, that's step 6, as I described earlier, and I call that expectancy investing. And I teach clients a comprehensive viewpoint on expectancy investing. It's a soup to nuts process. Like if you look at the testimonials on it, and they'll be up, on the site probably in the next couple months. But you can go to my testimonials page in my coaching. You'll find them there. People are saying, "Gosh, I've been investing 30 years and I knew nothing," or I could go on and on and on. It's a comprehensive understanding of how investing actually works. Once you have that, once you see it, you can't unsee it. Suddenly the elephant makes sense. You can contextualize all these half-truths people are throwing around. So that's what I teach. That's what's in the course. It's about a 9-month course to get through.
But like a general perspective about it, like is it buy and hold? Is it like
No.
get in and get out at a certain time? Or what's the
No.
strategies is all about in general?
No, it's active investing, so there is buying and selling, but it's not.
It's short term, long term, speculation, long term.
It takes 30 minutes a month. You have probably an average of about 1 round turn per asset class per year. It's active, but it's relatively inactive. It's more active than buy and hold, but it's not like options trading or something crazy where you're in the market every day. You check it once a month. It's no big deal. And it's just recognizing that not all periods of time and all asset classes and all things have the same expectancy. And if you constantly align your portfolio to favorable expectancies over time, it works in your favor. And there's ways to actively manage risk. And that has to do with the math of how money compounds. So there's just, you're asking me to take a 9-month course and boil it down to a soundbite, and it just doesn't work. There's a comprehensive understanding. It's multi-pronged, and any soundbite is just going to give you the ear of the elephant. It's going to give you the leg of the elephant. It's going to give you the tail of the elephant, but it's not going to give you the whole elephant.
What's the 4% rule?
The 4% rule was originally created by, I'm coming short on his name. I don't remember that's so funny.
The concept is more important than the name, no problem.
Yeah, I know. It's like I know the thing cold, and I just like have one of those brain farts on the name. But anyway, the 4% rule says that it's basically the minimum amount, or the maximum amount that you can safely spend from a portfolio annually without wiping the money out. And where the 4% rule came from was research based on U.S. data. And so what I like to explain is that while the research was conclusive for the data that it was done on, the research itself is not conclusive. And the 4% rule is a very dangerous generalization of a certain principle. So what they were trying to do is they were trying to define safe withdrawal rates in retirement, how much you can spend from your portfolio annually. And but there is no static number. And like if you take the 4% rule, Wade Pfau did some really nice research where he took the 4% rule and applied it to international data, and it failed 100% of the time. And so what we understand now is that the U.S. was basically what I call the prom queen of the economic world for the data period that was done. We had no wars on our soils, no political upheavals, no major problems, and we became the industrial leader. With the exportation of U.S. corporate culture throughout the world. And so to expect that to replicate in financial results, what happened in the last 100 years over the next 100 years is naive at best. So 4% rule is an interesting structure. It's an interesting benchmark for understanding some principles that brings in ideas of sequence of returns risk and other issues. But it is not a rule. It is a guideline or a principle based on a certain data collection, but it cannot be relied upon safely. There's much more to understand. And it varies greatly with valuation. What you can spend from your portfolio is more a function of valuation than most people understand. at the beginning of your holding period.
In plain English, what's the difference between stocks and bonds?
Stocks are equities, bonds are debt.
What does that mean? Like in terms of risk, let's say, if we focus on risk, what does that mean?
Well, it depends on how you define risk, first of all. I mean, do you define risk as volatility of returns? Do you define risk as risk of loss? Do you define risk as loss of purchasing power? Right? So it's not even that straightforward. To really understand stocks and bonds, stocks are equities. So you're owning a piece of the company, right? You're an equity holder, you're an owner. Whereas bonds is just debt, sometimes secured, sometimes not, depending on if it's a junk bond or secured bond or whatever. And so bonds are debt which the company owes you. So you've lent them money and they have to pay it back to you plus interest. There's no such promise on equity. Equity, you're an owner of the company. As the company grows, you benefit from the growth of the company.
But you lose it in case that only the company or the bank shut down.
You lose what?
The bond. Like if you buy a bond, let's say from a bank.
Well, you lose on a bond in two ways. You lose on a bond through inflation, where you lose purchasing power, and you lose on a bond through default. If the person you lent the money to or the company you lent the money to, it's no different than any other loan, right? If you lend the money and the lender doesn't pay you back, that's a default and you lose money. And so that's a simple way of understanding a bond. You're lending somebody or some company money and they need to pay it back plus interest. And so you can lose through that or you can lose through loss of purchasing power.
For the people who comes to you and they say that we have a like small income and we cannot save to invest, like what do you advise them to raise capital to invest? Like,
So I'm unclear. So you're saying somebody wants to begin investing but they can't save any money?
yes.
They need to either raise their income or lower their expenses so they can start saving money. I mean, the only other alternative is they have to leverage somebody else's money. If they don't have money, then they have to get money from someone else to leverage, right? So you could do that in, say, real estate or business. Very hard to do in equities, or paper assets. But you can do it in real estate or business. You'd have to be very good at creating deals. So like if you were a brilliant deal maker in real estate and you had no capital, if you get a deal, you can find capital, right? A good deal will find capital. Or if you're brilliant at building your business, you can find capital. Very hard to do in equities, though, public equities.
What is 401k and who should invest in it?
401k Yeah, 401k is just, well, first of all, you don't invest in 401ks. Okay, 401k is a legal structure that holds savings that's tax deferred in the US. Okay, and so it's basically tax deferred earnings that go into a 401k. Then from there, it is invested in conventional investment products. So you're not really investing in a 401k. You're putting money in a legal structure called 401k that has certain tax benefits, and then that money is then getting invested in conventional paper assets.
If we have somebody in debt and have, let's say, 10 credit card, he should pay how he should pay them? Like he should pay the minimum for all of them, or he should pay one by one? What do you advise them?
Well, that depends on the individual. There's a thing called the debt snowball and the debt avalanche. So I have a calculator on my website called the Debt Snowball Calculator or Accelerated Debt Payoff Calculator. And you use it just for that situation. And so the debt avalanche is the one where you prioritize from smallest to largest. And so it's the most emotionally satisfying one because you pay the minimum payments on all the other debts, and then you focus all money on the smallest one so you can start knocking out those credit cards as fast as possible. So you finally get narrowed down to the largest one. That's the most emotionally satisfying one. So if you have a problem with discipline, that's probably the better choice to take. Mathematically, it's the wrong choice, but this game isn't mathematics. It's both, we're humans. And so we have emotional issues as well as, the mathematics of finance to respect. And so it depends on the individual. If you're wanting to do the mathematically correct one, you prioritize your debts according to interest rate. So you put the highest interest rate debt first, focus all your pay down on the highest interest rate debt, regardless of which one's the largest. So let's create a crazy example. Let's say your mortgage is your highest interest rate debt. Not going to occur, but I'm just using it as an example. You would spend years and years paying down that mortgage before you ever got to your credit card debt, right? Because that would be the mathematically correct thing to do to get rid of the highest
But
interest
the
rate.
banks will not take like legal actions or like always fees on monthly basis, late fees, and maybe later on after 6 months legal action. I mean, you should also continue with them.
Well, yeah, the assumption in either the debt snowball or the debt avalanche is you're making the minimum payment on all the debts. It's where you concentrate the extra money that's the difference, right? Because in order to pay off the debt, you've got to have money beyond just the minimum payment. So it's a question of where do you concentrate it, right? Do you concentrate it on the smallest ones to get rid of the most credit cards fast, and you just roll everything up, and you just keep rolling everything up, and that's where the snowball idea comes from. You just keep rolling all your payments in the next credit card, and you just start knocking them out. Or do you start mathematically correct and get rid of the highest interest rate first, regardless of its size? That's the only question as to how you do it. But the rest of it's constant, which is you make the minimum payments on all of them and roll up the extra amount to any given debt. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, sure. Can you explain to us the latte factor and how to manage it?
Well, latte factor was popularized by Richard Bach. It's a well-known phenomenon, which is small periodic expenditures have a surprising impact on your budget. So latte came from the idea in the U.S. we have Starbucks everywhere. I don't know if you have them in Dubai, but and it's just high-priced coffee, right? And so people have this habit of swinging by there a couple times a day and spending $5 for a cup of coffee they could brew themselves for a lot less money. And so the idea was, how much is that really costing you over your lifetime? So that's where the thing got dubbed the latte factor. But it's true for anything. You can use it for magazine subscriptions, a storage locker fee, anything that's not really delivering value for you that you can eliminate. If you look at the compounded cost of that regular, periodic, small fee, $30 a month for a storage locker, $5 for a coffee. If you do it often enough, for a long enough period of time, it can add up to millions of dollars, literally. And so that's what the latte factor is. And there's a calculator on my site called the Latte Factor Calculator. And it goes through and does all the math for you. And you can just type in all your periodic expenditures, put it in there, and let it crunch the math for you. And it's astounding. It will blow your mind.
If somebody comes to you with an income of $2,000 to $3,000 a month and he wants to retire early, how long it will take him based on your strategies to retire?
Your voice cut out when you were asking the question. Could you ask that one more time?
If someone comes to you with $2,000 to $3,000 income per month, and he wants to retire early, how long it will take him to retire based on your strategies, what you advise him?
Well, that's a function of his savings rate as a percent of his income. There's a post on my site called How Anyone Can Retire in 10 Years or Less. And so it's not a question of how much income he has, it's how much he spends relative to his income, which is his savings rate as a percent of his income. So, anyone can retire in 10 years or less if they're willing to live on low enough relative to their income. And that's what that post goes through and explains. It actually breaks it down and shows exactly how long it'll take you for any given percentage savings.
What should we do before hiring a financial coach?
Well, I hate keep redirecting you to posts on my site, but it's like you're asking me to do that. I have a post on my site about how to do a due diligence process on a financial coach. It's one of the top ranked articles under the term money coach, I think, in Google. So you could Google it. It's three steps to hiring the right money coach for you. And then I even have a book out on Amazon called Don't Hire a Financial Coach, which is kind of a funny title for a financial coach, but it's Don't Hire a Financial Coach ... until you read this book. And what it does is it goes through and it explains kind of the seedy side of my business, how, big name authors go out and they create financial coaching backends that really, back-end products because they're lucrative, but they're not really valuable, at least from the feedback I get from clients who have been through them. And so, or at least worth the money that was paid, I think is a more politically correct way of saying it. So anyway, the book is a consumer's guide on how to understand financial coaching. And if somebody just wants to know how to select a coach, as your question asked, there's an article on the site that walks them through step by step. It's called 3 Steps to Finding the Right Money Coach.
What are some of the investment frauds that we should avoid, we must avoid? Some examples for that.
Again, I have a book on the subject called Investment Fraud, and it's doesn't sell well. I didn't do it because I ever thought it would be a bestseller. Nobody wants to read about investment fraud. And yet, if you're going to build wealth, you're going to run into it, and it's a subject you have to understand. Again, you can look at testimonials on my site. I've saved many customers from multiple investment frauds. They're fairly easy to recognize once you understand the principles of how it's done. So there's an article on my site for free called 26 investment frauds you have to avoid, or something like that. There's a variety of articles on the site for free about investment fraud. But basically, there's certain principles that fraudsters follow to prey on people's weaknesses, around get money for nothing, returns that are too good to be true, that don't obey financial common sense, on and on and on. Again, it's all listed in the articles for free.
How is the economy now, and what's your prediction for it for the next 5 years?
Well, first of all, one of the things I teach is that if your investment methodology requires a prediction about the future, then by definition it's flawed, because nobody can predict the future, including me. I'm actually pretty good at it. We did a study when I was in the hedge fund business, because we used all mathematically disciplined approaches to investing. But I'm actually pretty good at, quote unquote, predicting the future. I'm pretty in touch with what all the indicators are showing and things like that. And I could actually outtrade the approach about 70 to 80% of the time. The problem was when I was wrong so much that the disciplined mathematical methodology would catch up and pass me every time. And so, I really proved out the approach I teach for investing. So I don't actually predict the future. I think my viewpoint, but I wouldn't put a dime at risk on it. Okay. In my own portfolio, I don't put a dime at risk on this viewpoint. But if you want my viewpoint, it's that we're walking a razor's edge of stability right now. It's manufactured stability based on government intervention and debt, which is inherently unstable. This thing can go either into a severe deflation or a severe inflation at any point. I'm not smart enough to predict when that's going to be. And for all I know, we're going to get both. In sequence. And so I think that volatility is probably the safest bet going forward from here. I think we're going to see volatility. Sorry, I just don't believe in predictions. I think it's a waste of bandwidth.
Why money is not the main source of happiness, and how to create happiness in our life?
Well, that's just based on experience. I've worked with a lot of wealthy people. My kids go to private school where there's a lot of wealthy parents, and I'm very clear that there's, all the research is clear on it too. If you look at the relationship of money to happiness, there is a relationship, but it's pretty loose. It happens at the lowest end of the scale. Once you're above base living standards, you've got a comfortable existence. Your happiness is not really a function of money. The other thing that's proven by research is how you spend your money can bring happiness, but money itself is not a source of happiness. So there's some subtleties to the question, but no, money does not bring happiness. But it can reduce the friction in your life. You can buy your way out of things.
What are your habits, writing habits? How do you write efficiently?
My writing habits suck. I'm a stint writer. Like when I'm into it, I'll get into it and I'll completely lose track of time. But I'm managing a lot of different projects here. So I don't just have the proper writing habit of sitting down each day at 9 o'clock in the morning, facing the screen and writing, which is what great writers do. I'm managing the website and staff and, different products and different projects. And when I get down to write is here and there. So I'm not a great example of that.
How many staff you have, and is it all of them online, some of them offline?
Well, everybody's virtual. None of them are employees. They're all virtual assistants. They have multiple people they work with. I'm just one of many. I have Three right now. Three right now.
How do you structure them? Like one do, let's say, emails, another do social media. How do you structure their work?
Yeah, each has specialized skills that they bring to the table, and something that they're very good at that can benefit the business. So I have a technology person who does all the technology side of the business. I've got a graphic design person, and then I've got a general virtual assistant that includes the social media, but other tasks as well.
I noticed that you focus more on ebooks more than the paper back books. Why is that? And what's your experience with the
Well,
publishing or self-publishing and this world?
that was a mistake on my part, actually. I would be better off if I had them all in print form. Some of the books are relatively short, and I don't feel comfortable putting them out in print form. So like the variable annuity book, my whole goal was to reduce that concept and that issue down to as short as possible. Originally, it was going to be an article, but it was too long for an article, so it became a very short book. I think it's like 35 pages or something. I don't feel right about putting that out in print form, shipping costs and all that, but I think it's a mistake. If I had it in print form, it would sell better. The one book that is in print form has been through 3 generations. It began as a shorter book. All my books are written based on what I see as a need in the marketplace. So like the lead book that I've created, which is How Much Money Do I Need to Retire, which is my bestseller and has the most reviews and all that. That book was based on the fact that every client I worked with approached the how much money do I need to retire question completely wrong. And all the material that I had run across out there in the public domain at the time I wrote the book approached it wrong. I've changed a lot of that through my promotion of the book as well as people reading the book. I'm fairly connected in the financial blogosphere, and so, there's several hundred bloggers that have read the book now, so more and more people are starting to approach the subject correctly. But when that book was first written, nobody approached it correctly. And so I write a book based on a need. And so that book started out as like 30, 40 pages, then it became 60, and now it's like 120 as I've made it more and more complete. So that's why that book is in print form and does quite well in print form. My market wants print books, so if I had them all in print form, I would do better. It's a mistake I'm making that I need to correct.
How do you market for your books? Like you depend on only Amazon or you do some certain other steps when you launch a book? Well, what are the steps that you do?
Yeah, the book exists only on Amazon right now, and that's because Amazon basically owns the book market right now. I can go into a whole discussion on that if you want, but basically, so Amazon dominates the market. It's kind of the 80-20 rule. That's where the market is. If anybody wants to find a book, where do they go? They go Amazon. And so that's where they're located. How I launch them is a strategy around how you build awareness for the book and build constant traffic to the book and get the book to rank within Amazon's marketing machine. The key is, when you understand the Amazon game, it's that Amazon's a brilliant marketing company. And when you show up within their marketing algorithms, they will bring you 10 times the business you can send them. And so everything I do is to drive sales through Amazon, which then causes the book to rise to Amazon's attention, and then they cross-market it and multiply it out from there.
So it ranks based on sales and let's say reviews, or there are some other factors to rank the book. Let's say when somebody search for certain terms.
All the above and more. I mean, everything you said and more. There's quite a few factors, and obviously it's just like any other algorithm. Amazon doesn't reveal it, but there's a lot of people who spend a lot of time studying it to try to understand it, and so there's people who are far more expert than me on that subject that you could interview. But yeah, everything you listed is part of it. It's sales. It's the acceleration of sales versus the decline of sales. It's how it ranks within its category. It's the author and his rank. It's the reviews and the quality of the reviews. The authenticity of the reviews, that they weren't bought, that they can track them and see that they're actually from real buyers within the Amazon system. On and on. They're figuring it out. If you want to look at the Amazon review or the Amazon ranking algorithm, it's very instructive to look at the life cycle of the Google ranking algorithm. They started out with a really brilliant idea, and then people manipulated it, and they just got better and better and better, and that's what you're seeing over at Amazon.
Do you participate in any masterminds, or do you recommend any masterminds?
Absolutely, yes. As a matter of fact, right before we got on this call to record, I was on a mastermind call. And I highly value the mastermind. It's one of the best ways to get out of your own head and to stay focused. I fully support masterminds, but they got to be good. I've had masterminds that weren't great, and they're no longer there. And I've got a great mastermind, and we're still there to this day, 5 years later. So,
do you recommend any, or like how to participate in them? Is any one that you recommend particularly now?
I'm sorry, your voice couldn't. Is there any one mastermind that I recommend?
Yeah.
Well, no, maybe we're using the term differently. Masterminds are a community of people, usually, 4 to 7 people that meet on a regular basis, and they're masterminding together to support each other's business growth, at least using the context of a business. And so you can't really recommend one because that one's built and closed already. That's, it's a closed community. I know that Jamie Tardy puts out a product on how to develop masterminds. So I don't know if that's helpful for you. So she's part of the mastermind I'm in, and she puts out a product on how to develop masterminds.
What's your daily work and life routine look like?
Well, it varies with if I'm on vacation or in work mode. So it varies with the school year. It's basically driven by my kids' agenda. So my wife and I alternate workout days with getting the kids off to school. So every other day is my workout day, and every other day I get the kids off to school. And that's the morning routine. And then try to be in the office by 8 or 9 in the morning and put in a full day. And that's changed quite a bit. Like when I first became financially independent, I played out all the game of, I'll work out in the middle of the day, so I'll get my exercise in the middle of the day. But then every other day I was, pissing away half a day, and it was just destroying my productivity. So, you kind of learn what works for you.
Do you use any programs or recommend any softwares that makes you more efficient?
Your voice cut out on that last word, but I think it makes you more disciplined.
More efficient.
No, I'm probably your freak interviewee. I'm very disciplined. I'm still human, but I basically really look at, the way I work with myself is I look at what do I want? So I look at my year goals, I look at what my priorities are, and then I align my life with them. And I'm constantly checking to see if it's aligned or not. So the fact that I spent so much time coaching people, you almost can't pull the coaching watch over your own life. It's like you can't pull it off. It's there. So I'm probably not a great example of, what tools or what things would be efficient, just because I've spent so much time coaching people that I put that microscope on my own life as well.
What are your other hobbies?
Mostly outdoor recreation, oriented, like I was sharing with you. I went backpacking during the holiday break here, did a bunch of snow skiing with the kids. I enjoy books, quality movies. I'm a pretty simple guy. I mean, I love outdoor sports and reading and family and books.
Top 3 movies.
Oh, travel too. I enjoy travel.
Top 3 movies.
Well, I'm enjoying the Hobbit series right now with my daughter. I love Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid from when I was a kid. Top 3 movies. Oh, and Harold and Maude.
Top 3 books.
Okay, so I'm going to play something off you here. I'm not a big top 3 or top 10 list guy. Because it varies a lot. Like even top 3 movies, it resonated flat with me when I was saying them. And like to pick out top 3 books, like I just read a book called Essentialism, which I think is a great book, right? And I'm reading Seth Godin's book right now on choosing yourself, that he's just popularizing now through a different publishing model. And that's an interesting book. I mean, I think every book has its kernels to share, its wisdom to share. And so I don't really have like a top three or whatever on
Favorite,
my
yeah.
site. Yeah, on my site, it depends on what I'm into at the time and what I'm learning and what I'm interested in is what makes a book good or not good. So to pick top, I mean, what was top 5 years ago is at top today. So
Who are your mentors
I don't have any.
before?
I don't see. I don't think of it that way. I don't think of it as having a mentor. I learn from everybody where there's something to learn. Like I observe and I pay attention to what's working and I bring in what can add value to my life. But to say that I've got a mentor, that means something specific to me. That means that I've got somebody I'm specifically working with as my guide for whatever next step I'm working on. And I don't have that. So.
If you have the chance to ask your younger self and advise your younger self, what would you advise your younger self?
Don't break with your disciplines. So like and I've written quite extensively on my site about the mistakes I've made. um so like in investing, the mistakes I've made are all with breaking with the discipline of expectancy investing, which I teach. Every now and then, for some reason, my ego gets in the way, my big brain gets in the way, and I think I know something more than the methodology, and it always bites me in the rear. So that's my investing mistakes are done there. And then in terms of business decisions, it has to do with blindnesses, where I get focused on looking at a decision in a certain way or a certain framework, and it causes me to not see the whole picture properly. And that's true for everybody, by the way. I'm just quite aware of it. I coach on it, and I see it in my own life where I make the mistake. Everybody does it. It's just a part of the human brain. It's how our brains process information. So, and I've written a post on that one too. It's called "How smart investors make stupid mistakes" or something like that. How smart people make dumb financial mistakes, I think is what it's called. And it goes through extensively about this idea of how your brain can channel a certain thinking process and make you completely blind to the whole picture.
Who are your favorite financial writers or financial experts that you follow their advice?
Well, I don't follow anybody's advice, first of all, because again, I follow the models that I teach, which is expectancy investing. So I'm not getting advice from anyone or following any newsletters or any of that. In terms of, I really don't follow financial sites anymore. The people I'm learning from now are in completely different spaces. So like, I think Cal Newport writes some really interesting material on, well, you'd be interested. I imagine you are if you write about efficiency. Are you familiar with Cal Newport?
No.
Okay, Cal Newport has it used to be Study Hacks, but now it's called, I think, calnewport.com. And he writes a lot about, efficiency, productivity, and he plays a lot of interesting ideas around, the waste of time social medias versus going deep into subjects, which I find is really true in my work with clients about deep diving subjects, and it's also true in my own life with my work. So, the people I'm learning from are more with the stuff I'm confronting and dealing with right now. It's not financial per se.
What makes you really happy?
What makes?
What makes you really happy?
My ego. No, I don't know. Boy, what makes me really happy? Again, this question is almost like a top 10 thing. Like, what are the top 3 things that make me happy? And I never resonate with those questions. What makes me happy is living according to my truth, following my path, becoming the best person I'm capable of becoming. It's more of a, like, when I think of what makes me really happy, I think of like a little spike on a chart, like, oh, this was a happy day. And that's not what I'm working toward. I'm working toward a flat line of happiness that's sustainable and rising. And that doesn't lend itself to what makes you happy.
So
It's
what
more
what
of
is
a,
that? Is it like adding value? Is it working with
yeah,
other people?
adding value, community, contribution, um, all these things, achieving what the goals I set out to, my health, because it's hard to be happy when your health sucks. Um, there's all these pieces that fit together to create a happy life, but it's not like, oh, what makes me happy? It's this and this.
Last question, how people can contact you?
The hub of everything I do is financialmentor.com. So financialmentor.com. So that's everything, and then you can find anything else from there.
Thank you so much for this interview, Todd. Really appreciate it.
All right, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks everyone. Be efficient and stay efficient, and see you soon with another leading